Oh my God. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the next amazing and astounding and ebullient and effulgent episode of the next chapter of the section of the episodic reading Cow from Another World with bedtime stories thing, which this is. Ah, oh my God. I, it's been a long night. Uh, as you remember last time, we were on classics.mit.edu and the wonderful translation of Coriolanus of Plutarch concluded suddenly with a hideous truncation. Uh, yeah. So, if you remember, folks, last time Coriolanus was sacking all the towns and murdering all his countrymen with the in the aid of the enemy forces, which he was now the commanding general of, in revenge because the poor people wanted equality, and that was so offensive to him. Out of his magnanimity, he wanted to save the country from the poor people running amok and never ceasing to demand uh, sharing and equity and so on. So, and then what happened? Well, you know, nobody could talk him out of it, and so finally, the women who recognized the strange relationship that he had with his mother went to her and beseeched her with their lamentations and supplications. And uh, uh, I don't think they were bringing any remunerations, but they had considerations of the ramifications of a failure for them to be involved in any instigations to relieve the. Uh, anyway, so she responds when they ask her to go and see if she can talk some sense into her son uh, with the following. And yet, it's the greatest of our misfortunes that our native city has become so utterly weak as to place our hopes in us. For I know not whether the man will have any regard for us, since he has none for his country, which he once set before mother and wife and children. However, take us and use us to use us and bring us to him. Use us and bring us to him. If we can do nothing else, we can at least breathe out our lives in supplications for our country. After this, she took the children and Virgilia and went with the other women to the camp of the Volscians. The sight of them and the pitifulness of it produced even in their enemies reverence and silence. Now, it chanced that Marcius was seated on a tribunal with his chief officers. When, accordingly, he saw the women approaching, he was amazed. And when he recognized his mother, who walked at their head, he would fain have persisted in his previous inflexible and implacable course. But mastered by his feelings and confounded at what he saw, he could not endure to remain seated while they approached him, but descended quickly from the tribunal and ran to meet them. He saluted his mother first and held her a long time in his embrace. And then his wife and children, sparing now neither tears nor caresses, but suffering himself, as it were, to be borne away by a torrent of emotion. But when he was sated with this, and perceived that his mother now wished to say something, he brought to his side the counsellor of the Volscians, and heard Volumnia speak as follows: "Thou seest, my son, even if we do not speak ourselves, and canst judge from the wretchedness of our garb and aspect to what a pitiful state thy banishment has reduced us. And now be sure that we who come to thee are all of all women most unhappy, since fortune has made the side which should have been the most sweet, most dreadful to us, as I behold my son and the wife of thine her husband encamped against the walls of our native cities, and that which for the rest of us is an assuagement of all misfortune and misery, namely prayer to the gods, has become for us most impracticable, for we cannot ask from the gods both victory for our country and at the same time safety for thee. But that which any of one of our foes might imprecate upon us as a curse, this must be the burden of our prayers, for thy wife and children must needs be deprived either of their country or of thee. As for me, I will not wait to have the war decide this issue for me while I live, but unless I can persuade thee to substitute friendship and concord for dissension and hostility, and so to become a benefactor of both parties rather than a destroyer of one of them, then consider, and be well assured that thou canst not assail thy country without first treading underfoot the corpse of her who bore thee." "Over my dead body, son, over my dead body. For it does not behoove me to await that day on which I shall behold my son either led in triumph by his fellow citizens or triumphing over his country. If then I ask you to save your country by ruining the Volscians, the question before thee would be a grievous one, my son, and hard to decide, since it's neither honorable for a man to destroy his fellow citizens, nor just for him to betray those who have put their trust in him. But as it is, we ask only a relief from evils, something which would be salutary for both parties alike, but more conducive to fame and honor for the Volscians, because their superiority in arms will give them the appearance of bestowing the greatest blessings, namely peace and friendship, although they get these no less themselves. If these blessings are realized, it will be chiefly due to thee. If they are not, then thou alone will bear the blame for both nations, and though the issues of war are obscure, this is manifest that if victorious, thou wilt only be thy country's destroy demon. And if defeated, the world will think that, to satisfy thy wrath, thou didst break down the greatest calamities upon men who were thy benefactors and friends." While Villamnio was saying this, Marcius listened without making any answer, and after she had ceased also he stood a long time in silence. Volumnia therefore began once more. "Why art thou silent, my son? Is it right to yield everything to wrath and resentment, but wrong to gratify a mother in such a prayer as this? Or is the remembrance of his wrongs becoming to a great man, while the remembrance with reverence and honor of the benefits which children have received from their parents is not the duty of a great and good man? Surely, for no man were it more seemly to cherish gratitude than for thee, who dost so bitterly proceed against ingratitude, and yet, although thou hast already punished thy country severely, thou hast not shown thy mother any gratitude." "Ungrateful son, how dost thou thus?" etc., etc.
It were therefore a most pious thing in thee to grant me without any compulsion so worthy and just a request as mine. But since I cannot persuade thee, why should I spare my last resource?"
And with these words she withdrew herself at his feet, together with his wife and children. Then Marcius, crying out, "What hast thou done to me, my mother?" lifted her up, and pressing her right hand, warmly said, "Thou art victorious, and thy victory means good fortune to my country, but death to me, for I shall withdraw vanquished, though by thee alone." When he had said this,
and had held a little private conference with his mother and his wife, he sent them back again to Rome as they desired, and on the next morning led away his Volscians, who were not at all affected in the same way, nor equally pleased by what had happened. For some found fault both with him and with what he had done, but others, who were favorably disposed towards a peaceful settlement of the dispute, with neither, while some, though displeased with his proceedings, nevertheless could not look upon Marcius as a bad man, but thought it pardonable in him to be broken down by such strong compulsions. No one, however, opposed him, but all followed him obediently, though rather out of admiration for his virtue than regard for his authority. But the Roman people showed more plainly, when they were set free from the war, the greatness of their fear and peril while it lasted. For as soon as those who manned the walls descried the Volscians withdrawing their forces off, every temple was thrown open, and the people crowned themselves with garlands and offered sacrifices as if for the victory. But the joy of the city was most apparent in the honor and loving favor which both the Senate and the whole people bestowed upon the women, declaring their belief that the city's salvation was manifestly due to them. When, however, the Senate passed a decree that whatsoever they asked for themselves in way of honor or favor should be furnished and done for them by the magistrates, they asked for nothing else besides the erection of a temple of women's fortune, the expense of which they offered to contribute of themselves. If the city would undertake to perform at the public charge all the sacrifices and honors which, such as are due to the gods, the Senate committed their public spirit and erected the temple and its image at the public charge. But they none the less contributed money themselves and set up a second image of the goddess. And this, the Romans say, as it was placed in the temple, uttered some such words as these: Dear to the gods, O women, is your pious gift of me. These words were actually uttered twice, as the story runs, which would have us believe what is difficult of belief and probably never happened. For that statues have appeared to sweat and shed tears and exude something like drops of blood is not impossible, since wood and stone often contract the mold which is productive of moisture, and cover themselves with many colors and receive tints from the atmosphere. And there is nothing in the way of believing that the deity uses these phenomena sometimes as signs and portents. It is possible also that the statues may emit a noise like a moan or a groan by reason of a fracture or a rupture, which is more violent if it takes place in the interior, but that articulate speech and language so clear and abundant and precise should proceed from a lifeless thing is altogether impossible, since not even the soul of man or the deity without body duly organized and fitted with vocal parts has ever spoken and conversed. But where history forces our assent with numerous incredible witnesses, we must conclude that an experience different from that of the sensation arises in the imaginative part of the soul and persuades men to think it sensation, as, for instance, in sleep, when we think we see and hear, although we neither see nor hear. However, those who cherish strong feelings of goodwill and affection for the deity, and are therefore unable to reject or deny anything of this kind, have a strong argument for their faith in the wonderful and transcending character of the divine power, and in this rambling discourse remark on the relevance or irrelevance to the narrative. For the deity has no resemblance whatever to man, either in nature, activity, skill, or strength, nor if he does something that we cannot do, or contrive something that we cannot contrive, is this contrary to reason, but rather, since he differs from us in all points in his works, most of all is he unlike us and far removed from us. But most of the deity's powers, as Heraclitus says, escape our knowledge through incredulity. They escape me through incredulity. Yeah, I'll say that much for sure. But as for Marcius, when he came back to Antium from his expedition,
Tullus, who had long hated him and been oppressed with jealousy of him, plotted to take him off at once, believing that if his enemy escaped him now, he would never give him another chance to seize him. Ever, having therefore arrayed a large party against him, he bade him lay down his command and give the Volscians an account of his administration. But Marcius, afraid of being reduced to private station when Tullus was in command and exercising the greatest influence among his own countrymen, and said he would resign his command to the Volscians if they bade him do so, since it was at their general bidding that he had assumed it, and that he was ready and would not refuse even before that to give a full account of his administration to all the people of Antium who desired it. An assembly was therefore held, at which the popular leaders who had been set to the work arose and tried to embitter the multitude against it. But Marcius rose to speak. The more disorderly part of his audience grew quiet out of reverence for him and gave him opportunity to speak fearlessly, while the men of Antium and those that were especially pleased with peace made it clear they would listen to him with favor and give a just decision. Tullus therefore began to fear the effect of the man's plea in self-defense, for he was one of the most powerful speakers, and his early achievements secured him a gratitude which outweighed his later fault. Nay, more, the very charge against him was but so much proof of the great gratitude which was his due, for they would not have thought themselves wronged in not getting Rome into their power, had not the efforts of Marcion brought them near to taking it. Accordingly, the conspirators decided to make no more delay, and not to test the feelings of the multitude, but the boldest of them, crying out that the Volscians must not listen to the traitor, nor suffer him to retain his command and play the tyrant among them, fell upon him in a body and slew him. That's that. Good riddance to bad rubbish. And no man present offered to defend him. There you go. People reveal, their true colors in these situations. However, that the deed was not wrought with the approval of the majority of the Volscians was seen at once from their coming out of their cities in concourse to his body, to which they gave honorable burial, adorning his tomb with arms and spoils as that of a chieftain in general. But when the Romans learned of his death, they paid him no other mark, either of honor or of resentment, but simply granted the request of the women that they might mourn him for 10 months. This was customary when any one of them lost a father or a son or a brother, for this was the period fixed for the longest mourning, and it was fixed by Numa Pompilius, as is written in his life. Dead, gone once and for all. The loss of Marcius was keenly felt at once by the Volscian state, for in the first place they quarreled with the Equians, who were their allies and friends over the supreme command, and carried their quarrel to the length of bloodshed and slaughter. In the second place, they were defeated in battle by the Romans, wherein Tullus was slain, and the very flower of their forces was cut to pieces, so that they were glad to accept most disgraceful terms, becoming subjects of Rome and pledging themselves to obey her commands. There you go, folks. The conclusion of the life of the guy that loved his mom too much, Coriolanus. Uh, and let me say, folks, the original, you always got to go back to the original, because now when you go to the movies and you watch the movie version of Coriolanus in the context of contemporary history, it's going to be clear they had an agenda. If you go back to the original story, you see the guy was weird and a nut job and not meriting really any respect. Um, so please, folks, enlighten yourselves again next time on the next thrilling and astounding and amazing episode of the famous section of the next chapter of the episodic Reading Cow with bedtime stories from another world, the thing which this show is the show. Join us again next time uh, with unaccountable narratives never before heard by you. Until next time, goodbye.